Hi everyone, Slowly here. In this video, we're gonna have a quick tutorial on how to make weapons stronger in Diablo 3. So if you've ever found a weapon in Diablo 3 and thought to yourself, is this a good weapon and how would I even make it stronger? Then this video is definitely for you. But in order to make a stronger weapon, we'd first need to know what makes a good weapon. So what stats do we want on a weapon and what use does this weapon have in general? So if for instance look at my in-gem here, this weapon is used by a lot of builds for doing speed GRs and T16 speed rifts. So this weapon is usually used for speed content, and with any kind of item where you have a secondary, usually that is the most important stat, so you want a high secondary. For instance, on this in-gem here, it only has a 9-second secondary instead of the 10-second, so already there it will be significantly worse. Now I also quick want to mention that usually the elemental damage on your weapon does not matter at all, and by this I mean that you can see on my in-gem I have holy damage on my weapon here, and even though I'm playing either a cold or a fire build, this does not matter one bit. And I want to really stress that out because a lot of people are making this mistake thinking that you need a fire elemental weapon if you're playing a fire build. For 99 out of 100 builds, it does not matter what elemental damage the weapon roll has. Now what other stats are good on a weapon? So for instance on this in-gem here, of course the secondary is important. With any item we have a secondary, the secondary is usually the most important part, and after that is a high damage roll. So you can see it rolls from 1552 to 1887 holy damage, and if we hold control we can see how much it can actually roll in terms of the top parts, and of course we want that as high as possible. After that, usually a high percent damage roll is also really good. Here we have 9%, which is not terrible, but of course we prefer 10. And then usually some builds really like something like cooldown reduction, area damage, some will like attack speed, but all that varies depending on what build you're going to play. You can also see here, for instance on this in-gem here, you have a chance to deal area damage and it has rolled 24. If this weapon had only rolled the minimum of, for instance, 16, this would not be very good for us because we want to really maximize the amount we get per item. So for instance, if I had this weapon here and I didn't have my primal in-gem, it could be tempting to keep the area damage and then roll something like the dexterity away for more cooldown reduction. But since I'm playing with an in-gem, this weapon is almost always used for speed content, and therefore area damage is not that important, and therefore here it would actually probably be better to roll the area damage to something like cooldown reduction. And as you can see, that's how I have my primal rolled so far. So in order to make weapons stronger, we first need to know what we're looking for, and we also of course want to know what to roll it. So when you find an item that you know are used for your build, there are a few things you want to go over. First of all, is it a correct item? Second of all, is it a high secondary? So for instance on in-gem here, I would keep it if I had 9 or 10 seconds in the secondary. If it was 8, it would not be good enough, and therefore I would then have to remove it. This of course applies to every item out there. For instance, this Yang's recurve here has a multiplier on the secondary of 172%. Now if I was playing this build with the multi-shot skill, this would be a terrible item because I have rolled 172 out of 200, and we would of course prefer something in the high 190s instead. So after looking at the secondary to know if it's good or not, we're then gonna look at the rolls. We need to see, does it have the correct rolls? Does it have percent damage? Does it have cooldown? Can we make it so that it has the correct rolls? Usually if you're following some kind of build guide, it will tell you what rolls are good for your weapon. So of course we want to see if it's possible to have all those rolls, and we can of course always just roll one stat for another. And then after determining if it has the correct rolls, you of course want to see, does it have high rolls? If we for instance compare this in-gem here to this one over here, we can see that it has a way higher damage roll. This one has 1887 in damage roll, whereas this only has 1790. This also has a 9% damage increase, where this only has a 7%. So these two stats alone will make this weapon much higher in damage. But of course we also want to look at the other stats. For instance, this one has area damage, and this one over here has resource cost reduction. Now if you were playing a build that was really heavily dependent on resource cost reduction, this could be a really good weapon if you rolled the dexterity to something like cooldown reduction. But it'll still be kind of a bad weapon because you have a low damage roll and also a low percent damage roll. Now of course the next step would be of course getting a socket on the weapon. After we found everything about the stats and we've determined it's a good weapon, we of course also want to give it a socket. Now if you find a good weapon, you don't want to just roll for instance the dexterity here to a socket. You always want to use a Lightning Skift. So if you click the Lightning Skift and you click the weapon and you then added a socket to it. And then for almost every build out there, you want to use a Flawless Warrior Emerald, so you get critical hit damage increase. Now I'm showing this in season 25 where you have soul shards, but I'm making this a guide for the future as well, so I'm not going to really show with the soul shards that much. So let's say this is the weapon we want to use because it has resource cost reduction and we really want that, so we put that on and we can see our damage here. So currently I would be at 6.1 million, and if I then use the Flawless Warrior Emerald and put that in, we will go up to 7.3. So this is a massive damage increase. There are of course also builds where you use something like a topaz for thorns, but you can always follow the build guide you're using to find out which one to put in your weapon. And we of course also want to augment our weapon to give it even more stats. So we'll put in our weapon in the cube, we'll put in 3 of the flawless emeralds. If you want dexterity, of course, this also varies in terms of what stat you're after. So for instance, if you're intellect class, of course, use the topaz instead. You can always look at the stat here called other, and that's the augment stat it'll give you. To put in these 3, and then of course also a legendary gem. You put this in, you press transmute, and you would then gain a massive amount of more main stat. And you get 5 more main stat per level on this augment here. So 140 would be equal to 700 more main stat, which is just massive. And you of course want to do this on every piece of gear you have. And of course also remember to roll your item. Now let's do a little bit of experimenting. So let's say you find a weapon like this. Now pretend this as a weapon you use for a build, but you have these rolls here. So you have a 1629 damage roll, and you have no percent damage roll either. So what we roll here, do we get more damage by rolling the holy damage higher and then getting closer to 1940, or do we for instance roll the vitality to 10% damage increase? Now it can be quite difficult to see what would actually be the higher damage roll here, and we of course don't want to mess it up in case it's a really good weapon. So we're going to use another resource for it on this website over here called maxroll. So of course we want to import our character. You do this by the way by going to import and then typing in your battle tag, choosing your realm here. Then we get our build up on the screen here. Now let's type in the stats we currently have to see which one are the best options. Of course we're going to go in here. We're gonna change the weapon to sky color. That's where we're going to use for this experiment. We're gonna use it for an ancient and then type in the damage roll it currently has. So I have now typed in the rolls for the item here and make it precisely like we have it in the game. Now the number we want to look at here is the 2464.7% damage per second. We basically want to see what makes this the highest. Do we roll the holy damage roll higher, or do we get a percent damage on it? So let's see here, if we change this to say 1940, that will be the highest roll. It would go up to 2682. Let's try the other version here, change to 1628, and then we add the 10% damage increase to it. So we would of course have to then remove the vitality and then get percent damage on it. You can see here it came out to 2710. So even if we got a weapon like this that has a low damage roll, it is typically better to roll 2% damage. But of course we would then also lose at almost 1000 vitality, which is also really good to have. But if you find a weapon that has even lower damage roll than this, trust me, it is possible. It might be better to of course just roll the damage roll and not get percent damage on it. So if you're ever in doubt in terms of what to roll, should you go for a higher damage roll or percent damage roll, always use D3 planner for that, because there are definitely quite a few scenarios where you want to roll the damage higher and not get percent damage on it. Make sure to check out 1 and 2 videos here for even more amazing Diablo 3 guides, and I'll see you over there. Peace out everyone.